is the routine health report. It's the kind of like the risk reports, but we're taking it from a health point of view rather than a risk point of view when it comes to the SQL Server. So it's the same kind of branding you're used to, table of contents, a little bit of text about it, and then we get into just a quick summary about the SQL Server itself, what the SQL Server is, what versions are on, number of jobs, different databases on it, the data size, and the log size. The SQL Server health indicators, kind of like what your health indicators you see in the risk report, are now divided into an overall health score and then broken down to individual categories related to settings, files, resources, and the SQL Server agent in terms of whether or not it has problems in those particular areas. So rather than giving an overall score that is a little bit too nebulous, we're breaking it down to smaller entities. And by the way, we're going to bring this into the other reports that we have as well into the future. The SQL Server Health Detail, we're going over to the different sections. Now, settings, for instance. So these are what we have for the Microsoft best practices for how things should be set up. It doesn't, the only thing you'll notice is that we never say something is completely red or green because we're just saying it's okay, or there could be a potential issue because there might be a legitimate reason for having these settings set differently. So for instance, right here, the backup compression is not enabled. And then we actually put a recommendation here, a note about it telling you that backup compression can help save the size on the target drives by compressing the backups to reduce the time for the backup windows. And like we say, in most cases, this is desired. It might be different in your particular case. We go down to the files health. You'll see that what we have here, data file log placement. You'll see that they're on the same drive. This, if there's only one drive in the machine, then obviously this is going to be the case, but it's not necessarily the most desirable because you can cause I/O congestion if they're on the same drives. File placement, the data files are not on the OS drive. That's a good thing. The temp DB is not on an isolated drive by itself. Basically, since the temp DB is going to be written to all the time, having it on its own drive will help increase the performance of the SQL Server database. Once again, you have to take it with a grain of salt and explain to your customers as well that all these things are kind of situational. You might be on a system that is very old, doesn't have additional drives, doesn't have the kind of space, but it is a good conversation starter for that. Available disk space trend, 90-day projection. So we project out there, we see that you're going to have sufficient amount of disk space. And then we look at I/O stalls to see if you need more CPU to process the I/O. Over here, resource health, looking for just a couple categories of resource health. Signal weights, we'll see that they're above 10. This is a major indicator that you might need more CPU power, or you might need to rewrite some of the queries or have a DBA look at it, or the application writers look at your application, how it interacts with the database. Average current tasks, always less than 10. Physical memory, we determine that it's sufficient for operating your database. Then you'll see here SQL Server agent health. This is for basically, it's a SQL Server agent running in the first place. And do we have any kind of failed jobs? Basically, it's a quick way of just knowing that the major components of the system are running the way it should be. Let me go ahead and go into the next report, which is the SQL Server Detail Report. This is, instead of about the databases themselves, this is about the SQL Server as a whole. So we have in there system information, cluster information, hardware information, and so on. So I'll go over these different sections with you real quick. System information, here's a database on a machine called DB02. It is on a Windows 2008 R2 machine. It is not in a cluster. This will identify whether or not it's in a cluster and provide the cluster information. Hardware, it's running on a Xeon processor machine, 8 logical CPUs, 4 physical ones with 12 gigs of RAM. And I'll show you when the SQL Server was started. Then we go through, and this is very kind of routine, but we just basically document all of the current SQL Server values. And you'll notice that there's a value and a value in use. The value is where you set the value for. The value in use is what is currently being used inside the SQL Server at the time. So it's possible in a SQL Server environment to actually set a setting and have it not be that setting in practice. And that could be because the database server might need to be restarted or some other reason. So you see here that all the settings are documented. Now, if you think about this from a documentation point of view, think about it in terms of your DR kind of plans. And you might have backups of all the databases and everything, but when you bring up the database server again, if you had to bring it up fresh and new, you want to reconfigure it the same way it was configured before, and this will provide you with that documentation. The next part is to go through the different databases. We show here building out the databases online, the recovery model, where the files are located, which is very important, and the number of rows and sizes of the databases and log. So you see here for the databases, we'll show you the number of rows that are represented and then the size. Excuse me, without locking, I'm sorry. Input and output. So this is going through the I/O for the SQL Server as a whole. Which databases are consuming the most I/O? Where are the stalls at? Where are the number of reads? Where the number of writes are at? And then the total I/O as well. So you can help identify on a database server, there might be one or two databases that in particular are the noisiest ones. They might be the ones that are blocking the most, and it's good to know the nature of it, whether it's a write-oriented database or a read-oriented database or a read-write database, because that might determine the way and the types of file system that you put it on, or it might determine what type of RAID drives you might want to put to support the database behind the scenes. So let me go further to this, and this is CPU. This breaks down the CPU by the different databases, basically in terms of all the CPU that's being used by the SQL Server, what is the amount of CPU time that's being used by each individual database. So you can see here that these two databases are heavily used the most, this one in particular, but the reporting server actually has in there very limited use comparatively. Let me go further down here. You'll see CPU utilization in the last 4 hours. It's showing you all the CPU utilization in the last 4 hours. And this is just a small snapshot just to see if it's steady, if it's low, if it's high on the actual machine itself. Physical memory. This is showing you how much physical memory is being used by all other things on the machine and SQL Server. Then right here we break down the actual values. Wait types. Basically, where is all the time being spent while it's waiting, while it's not doing active work. And you see here in write log, it's spending a lot of time waiting there, and it has the percentage broken down to the different areas and tasks. And then over here, this tells you the number of average tasks running, and then pending I/O. Now this is one of my kind of favorite graphs to take a look at. Is basically how do the database sizes of backups fluctuate over time. And this might be because you're deleting rows, you're maintaining the database differently. You can see which databases are very steady, which ones fluctuate the most, and which ones are very minimal in terms of the amount of the backup size. And we see here the backup sizes, the compressed sizes, and the ratios. Logins, this shows you just the basic logins for the test database that we ran over, but it will enumerate out the logins for the SQL Server itself. Then we move into the actual databases themselves. So this report here is on the actual database detail. We're going to go database by database and look at each database. So this report, depending on, like Mark said, the more databases you have, the longer the collection will take because of the number of databases, not the number of rows in it. So for each one of these databases, we give you the database properties. We tell you if there's any missing indexes, and the properties basically have on there log size used. We'll highlight in red if there's, of course, you're running out of space of a certain type. Table locks will tell you what kind of table locks have been enabled onto the database itself. Statistics, have these tables been updated recently? And this one is a bad example, but the next database I'm going to show you here actually has a little bit of data in it. So when I go over to missing indexes, it'll list here some missing indexes. It'll tell you if there's an index advantage by getting into the indexes. And over here, you'll see that you have the different tables. And let's see. And over here, the storage, the average user impact, and all. And you can actually use this to help you decide whether or not you should add these indexes. And just to let you know, it's not always appropriate to have to add indexes into your system because there might be cases where adding an index may increase seek time, but may really hurt you in terms of insert time. So that's where having a little bit of knowledge about the databases themselves will actually, and their use cases will help out as well. Table locks. This goes over the different table locks, when it's created, which tables are latest created on. Excuse me. Statistics, this is another thing to point out to customers. Basically, if a database is decently well maintained, statistics are normally updated on a regular basis. And what we try to do is try to highlight for you anything that's kind of not an index that's ever used. So here are some indexes that have never been updated with statistics, but you'll see that they have no rows in them at all. Going over here, this goes for some more indexes. And then you see here for fragmentation, you'll see that we highlight some in red and some in red bold, basically telling you the amount of fragmentation in the database themselves. And basically, the best practice normally is that resolving anything that has fragmentation greater than 50% normally it helps increase performance significantly. And then we go again to more indexes. Now I'm going to go over, since I'm going quickly over this, going over to the maintenance plan section, and then I'll start answering some questions. The maintenance plan section over here has basically your listed maintenance plans for the SQL Server database found inside of the maintenance plan area. And plans are made up of subplans, and this is what we document in here as well. So if there's multiple subplans, it will be listed into this part. This isn't actually where it's run, but it's just listing and documenting the maintenance plans. We do pull information from the SQL Server agent and bring it into here, such as the last runtime, so that you can actually get a sense of when this plan was actually last executed. Typically, the maintenance plans are independent of actually the running. To get the amount of run, how the jobs are being run, or if there's problems, we have the SQL Server agent jobs report. In the jobs report, we go through each of the individual jobs. So a test plan might be, a maintenance plan might be made up of several subplans, and each of these subplans are made up of several steps, and they could have individual schedules to run on as well. So we document all of this for you. Then we go here, and then we show you in here the job history. We highlight in red if there's ever an error in executing that kind of plan. And we highlight that log message as well. I'll go to the next plan over here, and you'll see where the job history, there's no data for this job, but this job right here has successful executions and is not highlighted in red. So this will allow you, as a combination, to basically see what the database is doing and be able to see what type of, how the SQL Server agent jobs are running or not. And so we're trying to bring out just kind of like the major problems that could occur, and in terms of configuration, and also provide you with a way to do documentation and routine reporting. What this is designed to kind of do is, if you have a database under contract of any type, to provide you with a way of providing that monthly reporting needs that you do. Now, one thing special about database maintenance is if you do a great job, your RMM system will never pick it up because you'll never get an alert or alarm on it. It's only when you fail that there's going to be a problem. But if you're doing some type of managed database service, you want to show your customer that you're doing something for them every month. You're looking into it at least and checking on their health, which is what you're doing. And that's what the SQL Server Assessment module is designed for.